So welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I am here representing the Online Writing Center. And if all goes well, we will have some special guests with us here to bring in some of the faculty perspective. Unfortunately, this is the upper respiratory infection season. So our colleagues are hopefully going to be joining us from critical care after getting some Tamiflu and other stuff for the kids. And in the meantime, I'll be holding down the fort. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and how the Fireside chat came to be as an idea. And as I'm doing this, if you could please introduce yourself in the chat room, that will just let me know where you are in the program and perhaps where to tailor some of my remarks as far as what sorts of areas to go into more detail. But I started out my career in higher education never thinking that I would be getting a doctorate. I didn't think that I would be getting a master's degree even. I had an idea I would get my bachelor's degree in music performance and in accounting, and that I would have this career. And then, as has been the case with many of you, I know, I had some experiences and I fell in love with that. And the most logical path before me was to get a degree that aligned with that. And so I went to Boston University and eventually got my PhD in both music and English. And to my surprise, I became not just a professor of English and a professor of music, but also a professor of nursing, which was really quite a surprise for me because it started from one of those innocuous things. And then the next thing you know, I was invited to head academic support for a DMP program. And one of the first things we realized we were hearing from the students, and I was also teaching in the Doctor of Leadership Education program as well, and realized this was the same thing. People had a lot of great ideas from when they were in an in-person environment, and it was a lot harder to find out all those different little things that you got in the hallway from someone looking over your shoulder, from overhearing a conversation. And so we decided that an important element of our offerings was to create points of contact that are a little bit less formal than the class, a little less formal than a whole cohort conference call or Zoom meeting or something like that. Just a place where you can ask about anything you want and we'll talk about it. And when the time's over, if there's a lot of stuff that you still have questions, you can ask them to us, or we can schedule another fireside chat. You can also ask questions anonymously. So within Zoom, you can go to the chat box and where it says to everyone, you can just select my name and send me a private message if there's something that you'd like me to chat about that is not on the list. And I already have a couple things that people sent me via email that they asked me to speak about. If you could also let me know in the chat what course you're in now or where you are in the program, if that's easier, because one of the things I'm going to be talking about are some of the different resources and how they're organized and how we at the Writing Center are always looking for places to work with our colleagues in the faculty, in the library and other organizations within ACU Dallas, ACU Online, and how we might help you along with this journey. Because any sort of graduate degree is a journey. Sometimes it's a shorter one. Sometimes it feels kind of like a 5K if you've ever run one. The first time I ran a 5K, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. This is longer than I've ever tried running before. And then if that was your master's experience, then you might make an analogy to the dissertation being a marathon, which I've also run. And the first one I ran, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And now I've done a couple more. I'm like, ah, that wasn't so bad. But it's still a lot of work and a lot of time. I see we have a couple people from the leadership program and one person who's messaged me saying that they're in the nursing program. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about some of the things that we have and the whys of where they came from and how they speak to things that we have observed and that students such as yourselves have told us along the journey that they wanted or needed. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my web browser here. And for those who've been to our webinars before, this may be a little bit of a recap. Bear with me. So when we first started, the request from the faculty was, oh, can you teach APA? And if the only thing that they were requesting of us was just to teach APA formatting, that wouldn't be so hard. But APA is more than just a way of formatting things. It's a way of thinking and organizing thoughts. And there's a lot about the style of writing that asks for an exactness, a specificity to try and remove barriers of communication. And I see that we have people joining from a number of different parts of the United States, Washington, Texas. I know some people who RSVP'd for this are joining us from Florida, and we have some students who are in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think we have a couple students who are dissertating right now who are in China still. So we have a wide range of places. And one of the things that we did at Boston University when the grad students would get together, we would have little conversations after class about, so what did you mean when you said this? Or why did you say that? Because we have people who are coming from the Midwest, from the Deep South, from New England, California, and internationally. And sometimes you would say something where the response at the time would be something on the level of, okay, those are words that I recognize. I am not sure why those words are there and what they mean. And as an example, I'll give you a time when I was living on the island of Mauritius in the Southern Indian Ocean. I'm living with a group of 8 Australian med students. And one of them turns to me, we're just lounging on a pleasant summer afternoon. And he says to me, you know, Basil, you should wear thongs more often. And I think I turned a color and said, thank you for the advice, and thought to myself, I didn't think we had that level of friendship where they would comment on. And at that point, they recognized my expression and broke out laughing, because in Australia, that word refers to what we call in Hawaii slippers, which we might call sandals or flip-flops or something else, and not at all what I thought they were referring to. And so one of the goals of writing in APA style is to have a unambiguous communication. And that's the thing that is the hardest about writing in APA style, realizing that some things that we understand really well because we know it, we're living it, we've been researching it, are not always clear to our reader. And for those of you who are dissertating right now, you may be familiar with the experience of meeting with your chair and things are going great. And then you have another committee member who reads the manuscript and has lots of questions, and you're wondering, well, wait, where did those questions come from? And it's because we are able to fill in a lot of the gaps ourselves. We understand what we're talking about. Once you've had a number of conversations, traded some drafts of emails with your chair, they understand. But your second or third reader is coming in as someone who doesn't have all that benefit and can't fill in the gaps the way that you or your chair can. And so the goal is that you will write so that the final manuscript will be clear to everyone who is, reasonably well educated and has at least some slight familiarity with the topic, will be able to follow it and understand what you're communicating. So here on our webinars page, at the top, you see the calendar of all the webinars that are upcoming. In the middle, we have this tab guide, which is partly a recognition of all the webinars that we have, and that it's a little confusing to look for them by name or word search because there are literally more than 100 recordings here. Well over that, I think. We're over 200 now. But also because sometimes you're looking for a very focused resource. So those of you who have held an APA manual in your hand and looked inside it can tell me that there's a lot in there. Now, if you're looking for that specific thing, it's got great detail, pages and pages on how to do citations. And most of the time, we just want something more concise. And these webinars are in part our way of, let's pick something very specific and go through it in detail, with the idea that it's functioning somewhat similarly to if you sat down with your TA in a class, or if you were sitting with another student and looking at the instructions. So what are they asking us to do? So these are all here. If you're in the leadership program, getting your EDD, you might go ahead and look here and see that we start with some general webinars and that these are all sorted by the course number. So if you were in, say, Leadership 765, you can see that, oh, we do have a couple webinars that are dealing explicitly with specific assignments or types of assignments in that program. And we do have those sorted so that they go by calendar week. So for example, in week 2, you might watch our crafting a synopsis of literature webinar. And then after that, you have a number of assignments about problem statements. So we have a webinar on that. Now, one of the big things about being a graduate student at Boston University is that you learn a lot of fun slogans. I mean, it's an old school, it's been in a major city for a long time, and old enough to develop a special way of doing things. I will never forget when I was in the auxiliary services office, and the director said, well, you know, there's the right way, the wrong way, and the BU way. And there were a lot of stuff at the university that, oh, there were reasons why it functioned that way. It didn't mean that they made sense, but that was how things were done. And a lot of what happens in higher education can feel like that because of the way that things are named, or the office that you go to, or just the way that things are organized. And when I was at the University of Tennessee, I was a library faculty member. I'd never worked at a library before. I certainly didn't mind, but people found it really confusing when they come to my office and they say, well, hold on, why is there a harpsichord here? And I'm like, well, this is where they gave me my office. And I thought this was especially funny when the piano teacher came to meet with me, and she realizes that I had the only harpsichord and the best piano on campus in the library. And then she asked, could she borrow them? So I encourage you to ask questions as we go, because my purpose being here, and my colleagues, if they're able to join us, is to be able to tell you more about things that you want to know. I do have a couple things that I have prepared and a couple things that people have messaged me about. So let me talk a little bit about transitions and how that works with the progression of courses. And I'm going to specifically talk about the EDD program and the DMP program, because those are the ones where students have said, oh, I'm in this program. But if you're in a different program and you have a question or would like me to discuss your program progression, just send me a message, type it in the chat, and we'll go from there. So if we were to divide things into 2 periods here, and I'm just going to start drawing on this, we would have the stage 1, that'll be the coursework. And then we're going to have the dissertating. And in between these, we have something of a gap. And I say something of a gap because this is where students on campus or off tend to fall in. Because the coursework is very structured. In our online professional degree programs, it's more or less a linear progression. There are a couple courses you can take in different order, or you might choose to start with one because of a particular interest. But for the most part, you're moving linearly through. And then you get to the dissertating stage, and it's less organized, and in the sense of there isn't something due every week to move you forward. And that is challenging for many reasons. One of those is that nature pours a vacuum, and the rest of your life will eagerly eat up anything else that you're doing, because most of our professional doctorate students are at least working full-time. If you're a nursing student or you're an educator, probably that full-time is a bit more than 40 hours. And it's very easy to spend time on that and a bit harder to make progress on the dissertation. And so what my colleague is hopefully going to be expanding on a little bit more later when she joins us is about how to strategize and work with your chair. And I asked her to join us specifically to give her perspective as a faculty, a person. I've been faculty, I've been staff, I've been both. Mine is more of a spectrum, but when you're coming at it just as faculty, sometimes people worry that it'll be offensive or too much of demand on your time. And I would say that for the dissertation journey, our happiest moment is when you finish and we can look forward to all the wonderful, exciting things that you'll do from then. The dissertation is a launch pad to the next things that you do in your life. And we've had some students come through this program and do a lot of really impressive, high profile things. And we've had lots of students come through who've done things that might not make the headlines, but have really changed a lot of people's worlds for the better. And so we are really interested and invested in your success. And if it helps you to have a schedule where you mark down, all right, this day I am going to send X, great. I'm going to show you what one of my colleagues had me do when I was a doctoral student. So I'll be sharing my screen in Microsoft Word. If you can let me know when you can see that, that'll just let me know that this chair is working correctly, because sometimes Zoom adds up. So our goal first is to define what the priority is. And this is going to vary by every person, but at least as far as being a student, I was asked, okay, where do you want this degree to take you? And I said at the time, university professor. Okay, what does that mean? Do you want to be in a certain place, at a certain type of institution? So I challenged and I said, okay, I want to be being paid to teach and research full-time. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because some of my colleagues did not want to do research. The fact that they had to do a research dissertation was for them an obstacle to be overcome and not the pure joy. And that's fine. There are lots of reasons why people get doctoral degrees. And if it's because it's a credential that you need, great. Understanding why you're in that and setting boundaries appropriate to what you need, awesome. But let's say my goal had been just not to teach and research full-time, but to teach full-time. If that was the case, then I would have looked at my dissertation less as the capstone, oh, this is going to be summarizing all that I do. I'd have been looking at it in the sense of, how will this be a credential for the job that I want? And that will vary a little bit. One moment as I take my pies out of the oven. That will vary depending on what your priority is. And depending on your job, you might have a financial incentive to finish up sooner rather than later. Or you might have something like a financial award, especially if you've got an external fellowship where you want to use it for a certain amount of time. I had as my second thing here, my timeline. I'd come to Boston University on a scholarship, and so I had a very simple goal: finish before the university would come and charge me tuition. And if you're paying out of pocket, you know that that's not a small sum. If you are getting funding from your district for postgraduate units or professional development credits from your employer, awesome. But generally they want to see certain results. And that might be get certain grades. It might be you're reimbursed upon completion of the degree. It might be you get an increased paycheck as soon as you're able to present the completed credential. So I had my timeline, and I'm happy to say I finished right before that point. Now, I actually finished 2 days before they would charge me a tuition bill. And for that, I would say that is a powerful incentive to work very efficiently and focus for a limited period of time to get to that point. So you might start doing this up on your own computer or on a piece of paper. Okay, here's your goal, and here's your timeline to finish that. In my case, I said, okay, January 2013. And I graduated in January 2013. To get there, I knew I had to finish my dissertation research by a certain point. And I mapped out, okay, here's when I need to deliver the chapters. And so I've made a list. Now, here at ACU, you are writing a 5-chapter structure. So let's just bring that up. So chapter 1 is going to be the introduction. This lays out, oh, here's the problem that I've identified. Here's the purpose of my research or project that will be addressing some part of this problem. Here are the specific questions that I'm trying to answer along the way. And why is this important? Your second chapter will be your literature review. So if you've been wondering about those lit review and annotated bibliography assignments, that's about preparing you for writing the lit review. And this is a curated list and commentary on key findings relevant to whatever it is you're doing for your research. And if someone could give me in the chat, either by private message or in the open chat, a topic, I will use that for examples for the rest of this chapter discussion. And then chapter 3 will be your research methods, where you say, okay, well, here's exactly how I'm going to be going about doing that. Okay, so topic from someone, reducing bullying in public schools. Okay, so if that's your topic, then in chapter 1, we would define the general problem and the specific problem. And with something like bullying in public schools, that could go in many different ways. You could be looking at it from a social worker perspective. You could be looking at it from the perspective of a principal, a parent, a classroom teacher. And the way that you look at it and how you define that problem will vary. Let's say you are, you've set your goal here, and we'll go ahead and replace this here with your goal is being a middle school principal. Okay. If that is your goal here, you might say, all right, one of the reasons I am working on my dissertation, why I'm picking this particular focus, is because when I'm done, I want to have, if you'll pardon the language, a kick-ass talking point for job interviews. And that's perfectly fine. I will say, one of my colleagues picked a great dissertation topic. Everyone knew something about it, but not a ton. They had lots of questions immediately. And every time I meet her, I ask her about how her latest research on that has gone. You may find something like that that speaks to you, that you know is about something important, and pick that for your topic. So let's say you have selected this bullying problem. Okay, let's define the scope. Now, the general problem could be a countrywide thing, or you could be looking at the particular dynamics of an area, cultural boundaries, poverty, anything like that. But let's say the United States is our geographic scope, and our general problem is bullying contributes to missed school days. Now, again, the way that you address this and which aspects of this problem that you're defining you go after can be highly variable. And so one of our goals is, before you're done with chapter 1, to narrow down to what is practical for you to complete, given your goals, your timelines, etc. Now, bullying contributes to missed schools can go both ways, about the people doing bullying and people being bullied, especially if you have people who are not coming to school because they're frankly uncomfortable or concerned for their safety. So let's narrow this down already. So we could talk about this from this perspective of school metrics. That sounds a little bit heartless, perhaps, but it's an important thing. You could talk about it in terms of educational quality of experience or anything else like this. So let's go back and say, all right, bullying is a widespread problem in US public schools that creates numerous disciplinary incidents and endangers students' health and educational experiences. All right, so I've written up a first draft of the start of my problem statement. Bullying is a widespread problem in US public schools that creates numerous disciplinary incidents and endangers students' health and educational experiences, with many negative consequences to the schools and the students. Okay, that sounds bad. So that's also a much larger problem than you can reasonably expect to address by yourself in a couple years of working as an EDD student. So we need to define the specific problem. All right, so what aspect of this are you going to do? Now, I was talking with a clinical social worker the other day who was part of a very successful de-escalation program where they went, and besides making sure that any student who was bullied was okay and getting supported, they also had kind of intervention therapy with the bullies. How are things at home and stuff like that, where they try and diffuse and redirect and channel people's frustrations, energy, etc., into more productive paths. And they've actually had a really good record of making positive improvements in these students' lives. So you might narrow down here and say, okay, the specific problem is, and then define an area, a band, and a grade level. So we're going to go back here and say the general problem is that bullying is a widespread problem. Okay, we can tweak that later if we want to avoid using problem twice, but this tells us, okay, this is a general problem. Specific problem is that now I've just made up this middle school name, so hopefully this doesn't actually exist out there. But the specific problem is that Henry W. Sackton Middle School has a high incidence of bullying amongst 7th graders. Now, high incidence of bullying sounds bad, but we can make it even more clear that this is a problem. All right, so here's what we're looking at. The specific problem is that Henry W. Stockton Middle School has a high incidence of bullying amongst seventh graders. Historically, more than 25% of students who perpetrated bullying at the school have entered the school to prison pipeline with significant long-term consequences for their lives, including multiple incarcerations and reduced lifetime earning potential. Now, we could go into more detail about that, but if we look at what this is setting up, we have a general problem, a specific problem where we're targeting the existence of the problem at an area amongst a certain demographic. And we have reasons and that state clearly, this is something important to do. And then we start talking about what the purpose will be. So what exactly are you planning on doing? And just to give an example here, you might be going and interviewing people. You might be enrolling people. You might be getting historical data to look and see, okay, what were the strategies that have worked in the past? What if strategies have worked at another place? I was talking with a graduate student earlier this week about their research, and that they have a district where one school's done really well at addressing underperformance in math, and the rest of these schools are wondering, how can we do that? How can we do whatever they're doing at our school? What exactly are they doing? And so you might pick on that. You've got the general problem. Okay, standardized test scores for most of the country took a dive the last couple of years. You looking at the local incidents saying, okay, there is a school that's doing well and schools that aren't. Now it's where the particular implementation, where the purpose goes in. Because you'd be saying there's a practice gap. All right, we know things are working at this school, but we don't know why it's not working at this other one, or how we can get them to do it at this other school. And so you'd have very different research according to that. I'm a big believer myself in, if you're going to be spending so much time as you will for a dissertation, that you should be passionate about and love your topic. That doesn't mean that the topic might have some hard things, but that if you are excited when you sit down to do reading about this, if you have things that you say, once I'm able to do this, I will be able to do X part of my job, or my coworkers will be much better. Awesome. More power to you. That will help you define the problem more specifically, more narrowly. And then when you come to writing the literature review, you'll be able to be that much more focused and to produce a text that is actually much more concise. When you don't define that problem very narrowly, you end up having a much larger, broader lit review, and it's hard to know when to stop. But if you have a specific goal, like, oh, I need to finish by such and such a time, and let's say that your goal is to graduate May 2024, and okay, I've got 2 more terms of classes. If I'm going to be finishing in more or less a year for the dissertation writing, research, and defense, I need to make sure that that is a reasonable thing, a doable thing. And so that might shape how you do it. So for example, we had one student who was working on her doctor of nursing practice, and she was planning on a intervention, where you go and change something and then you see what happens there. And it happened that she was offered a big promotion that, if she had her degree in hand by the time she started it, she would have a big raise. And if not, it would be 2 years before they would revisit and up her compensation. So she had a strong incentive to finish. And in that case, she was a professional nurse, a practitioner already. She's just working on the DMP degree. And she knew from other things that she could do what we call a chart review, where you go back through all this data that's being collected already. And she said, you know what? I can do step 1. I can do a chart review to to really inform an intervention that I want to do, but I want to do it after I have that job and they're paying me the extra money. So we use this to narrow these part of the problem that she was addressing to something that was still very much worthy of a doctoral degree, but was exactly what she needed to meet her career goal, which in this case was to become a hospital administrator, and then to meet her graduation timeline. And because she had that very specific goal in mind, we were able to avoid what we call dissertation feature creep, where you learn about cool things and then you start writing about them, and then you have to write more about them, and your committee looks at it and says, oh, I'm not sure what the connection is with that. And so then you have to write even more. Whereas if you stuck to the narrower plan, you wouldn't have to do nearly as much. So we try and avoid dissertation feature creep, and it starts with how narrowly you describe things in chapter 1. That's one of the reasons why if you are in, say, leadership 765, why the faculty may seem awfully picky about things. And that's in part because we're trying to help save you writing things you don't have to for what you want to meet the goals that you have right here and now. I mentioned at the start of this that I didn't expect to go on to graduate school when I was an undergrad. And one of the reasons I did that is that the people that I knew who had gotten doctorates were almost exclusively people who did that at the end of the career, writing about the kind of thing that you can only really do at the end of a career. So I remember one professor who had spent 25 years of his life in cathedral archives. He knew all the documents, he could find them on the shelf. And I thought that that was what you had to do before you could get a doctorate. And it just happened that he was doing that anyway. And then he got the doctorate because he was teaching, and they said, oh, we'll pay you $30,000 more a year if you have your doctoral degree. And so he went and got his doctoral degree. Nothing wrong with that. The math worked out very well for him. But that was why he actually went and became a graduate student. And for whatever your reasons are, I am sure there are things that you want to do that you are enrolled in this degree program in part because you have a door that you want to walk through. And so we'd like to help you do that and help you plan out how the dissertation might help you do that. And some of that might be finishing the dissertation sooner rather than later. I did, for the record, have some rather ambitious ideas about how I'd add another chapter to my dissertation if I got a scholarship to go to India. But I didn't get that scholarship. So I finished with the chapters I had, defended, and moved on to the next thing, which included getting a job that required that I have the dissertation. So I am glad that I made that decision. All right, I'm looking at the clock, and we have on the schedule, we're going to have a dissertation formatting clinic coming up on the hour. And so we want to have a small break before that. I was waiting for a colleague who is currently with a couple of her kids at urgent care. So I will go through the notes that she has given me, and then we'll take a short break. In the meantime, you're more than welcome to ask a question publicly or privately. And I can talk about those things during the break too. So don't worry about time. All right, in terms of the advice for graduate students, here I have a couple words from my colleague. First, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. Anything you want to do in life will be easier when you don't have the dissertation hanging over you. You will feel lighter, you will feel freer, you will not be paying tuition, and you will be able to call yourself doctor, which is pretty cool. If you aren't sure whether your dissertation is the size you need it to be, send me an email. If you aren't sure whether your dissertation is worthy of being a dissertation, then look at your problem statement. If you're not sure whether your methods are appropriate, look at the literature. If you're not sure if the literature review is long enough, ask yourself, does chapter 2 explain why I do what I do in chapter 3? All right, let me try and put a summary on that. So a question of whether a topic is worthy of study, this is you as the writer having the obligation to convince the reader. And the more clear you are about what exactly is the problem and what are the consequences of that problem not being addressed, the more compelling it is. There are lots of things where in that first conversation, myself or faculty colleagues said, I'm not sure who this is a problem for or how much of a problem it is. And that in a revision that came out more clearly. Now, as far as the lit review to chapter 3 connection. So chapter 3 says, okay, here's exactly how I'm getting my data and how I'm going to make sense of it. And the lit review is designed to support both to give further background on what's been known about the topic as relates to your solving some part of it and the specific methods that you use to do that. So you want to align chapter 3. Like if you're recruiting, let's say 50 survey participants, and your literature review has said, oh, these people found good results from getting this number of people. That's great. You have someone saying, oh, yes, this worked, that you can align with, rather than having someone saying, I picked 50 people because it sounded reasonable, which isn't as convincing as I picked 50 people and that's the standard and it's recommended by this person here. All right. I'm just looking through, I have received a couple texts during this with some additional information. So give me a moment to look at that. There is no wrong length for a dissertation. Let's listen to that. I think that's an important thing. There is no wrong length for a dissertation and the dissertation journey, period. Some people are on a longer journey because of how their life is set up, and that is fine. Some people are on a shorter journey because of what they want to do, and that is fine. At the end of the day, you're the person who will be writing it, and it will be one of the great things that you do with your life. That said, we will try our best to convince you to write a shorter, more concise dissertation, because there are lots of those exciting things that we look forward to seeing you do afterwards. I think those are some great pieces of advice. Okay, again, please feel free to type questions. I'm going to mention a couple things in the chat in response to your private message that people have said. First, you can certainly ask other students in the program for advice on things. There are a lot of students who have formed accountability groups and even editing groups where they pass drafts back and forth or just text each other things and ask, does this make sense? Now, you can certainly involve the Writing Center with that. We're happy to help. And I will just say that we do have people who send us one sentence, they're making the first stab at the problem statement, and they just send that in and ask for feedback. That's fine. We're happy to help. Usually when you're working with your professor, if you're beyond the early assignments where you're setting it out, they'll want to see a little bit more. But by all means, and the biggest thing with getting feedback from the Writing Center versus faculty or colleagues is what works best with your timeline. If you make an appointment at the Writing Center, we've got a fairly strict schedule about when we'll get back to you. We always try and do that within 24 hours, and it only goes above that if we're in a holiday period, Easter weekend, that kind of thing. Faculty, I'm sure know from experience that sometimes it takes longer than others to get emails back because of the number of students in the class or something like that. And so people will often divide their questions and try and, when they send things to their faculty person, make sure that it's something that they've done their due diligence. And for something like sending in a dissertation chapter for feedback, that they've done all they can do to make it polished and let the faculty person focus on the ideas. Lit review, that's also the case. You can, if you're having trouble finding sources, back when I was a graduate student and I would meet with the library staff, many of whom had advanced degrees themselves and were all experts in finding things, but we'd also sit down with my professor sometimes and talk about the gaps that they saw. And I'll just say that every doctoral student is shaped by part of the experience at wherever they went to school and where their dissertation chair did their dissertation. So while there are some EDD programs that have a little bit more of a humanities style dissertation, and here we use APA style, and many of our faculty have similarly done their dissertations in programs that used APA style, and so they prefer and encourage a certain directness to things. And if that's something that you're still working on, let me just go back to the web browser and let's talk a little bit about where not to stress. So here on the Writing Center website, if we start at the homepage, if we start at the homepage, you'll see that under services, we have tutoring appointments. So those are those one-on-ones, writing webinars, things like this, in-class writing workshops, editorial review. So one of the reasons we work with students so often about their formatting is so that when the faculty see their writing, they can focus on the ideas and how those connect. But at the end of the dissertation writing process, after your final defense, there is a step called editorial review where we send your manuscript to a professional editor who will do all those things to make sure that it looks all the things it should, that it is a professional looking, consistent credential, that when it's posted online, if someone were to read your job application, look at it, they'd say, yep, that's a great looking dissertation. And of course, the ideas in it will be great too. So please, if you run into some issue with the template or formatting, send us an email, contact us. We're happy to help with that. Don't fret of it. I once had a student who said that they spent 6 hours trying to get something to look right in Word. And then we looked at it together on Zoom and they were done in 30 seconds with it. So we have members of our team who are experts in using those more obscure functions of Microsoft Word. Don't worry, we can help you solve those problems. The more you can focus on, first, outlining your ideas, second, getting them down in a document, and third, organizing them so that they tell a clear argument, a clear story of what's going on and how your research is addressing that, then the faster you'll be able to proceed. All right, I think we should probably pause the Fireside chat here. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll continue with the dissertation formatting clinic portion. So I'm going to turn off the recording